Well, good morning. I know this is probably a little bit different than what most of you were expecting, probably different from all of you were expecting this morning. For those of you who are not in the live Sunday school class, welcome to the party, because I'm not in the live Sunday school class either. So if you couldn't tell by my surroundings, I am in my dining room and I am pre-recording this on Saturday night. So if you're watching on Sunday morning, I am presently on my way to Sumter, South Carolina, where I've been sent to work for the next 2 weeks. So we're going to make the best of this, and we're going to pray that the Lord blesses it. I am also sick, so I have my box of tissue and I have my soda. I may make use of both of them during this video. This is probably going to be a little bit shorter than what we usually do. I usually try to do between 45 and 50 minutes on Sunday morning. I've only timed this out once, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be quite a bit shorter than that. So you can have time at the end to discuss our 2 questions that we normally do at the end. But I'm just kind of, I don't know if my voice is going to make it through. It's not COVID. I did take a COVID test. So I guess just like a little summer cold or something. So we are in Jeremiah's chapter 32 and 33 this week. We are coming off of chapter 31, which is the New Covenant chapter. And Jeremiah is the only prophet to use that term. Other prophets, they refer to the New Covenant, but they call it an everlasting covenant. And so Jeremiah is the only prophet to use the term New Covenant. And he's speaking of the New Covenant that Christ will initiate when he sheds his blood and gives his own perfect life as a once-for-all sacrifice for his people to be reconciled to the Father. He is the serpent crusher, he is the Passover lamb, and he is the righteous branch of David. And we're going to pick it up in chapter 32. The opening verses set the context of time and place for us in chapter 32. So we're going chapter 32, verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. At that time, the army of the king of Babylon was besieging Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was shut up in the court of the guard that was in the palace of the king of Judah. Okay. So we're very close to the end of Jerusalem. We are told in 2 Kings 25, excuse me, that the siege of Jerusalem began in the 9th year in the 10th month of King Zedekiah. And so here it's the 10th year of King Zedekiah. So the siege has been going on at least a couple of months, possibly about a year. I'm so sorry, y'all. Okay, and I feel like a siege is probably so far removed from us that I want to take just a second so that we can kind of orient ourselves into what a siege might be like. So we would call it, I had a word and I didn't write it down. It'll come to me. But I'm thinking of a blockade. We would call it a blockade. The city has been closed off, and the gates to Jerusalem have been shut. You remember around the wall of Jerusalem, there were several gates. All of those have been closed. Now, King Zedekiah would have done that in order to protect the city from the approaching Babylonians. And now the Babylonians are here, and nothing for sure is getting out of the city. In fact, the Babylonians were so serious about nothing getting out of the city, they constructed a second wall around Jerusalem. So on the off chance that anyone did actually get out of the city of Jerusalem, they for sure aren't getting past the Babylonian wall. So there's no food being brought in. And their food supply dwindles down and dwindles down. There's no miracle of the flour and the oil in this case. There's no waste being taken outside of the city. Now just think about your home, one home. If you don't take the garbage out for a whole year, just in your home. And remember, no modern plumbing. And the law of Moses said that human waste had to be disposed of outside the city gates. And they even had a specific gate that they were supposed to use, and just use that one gate for that specific purpose so that they wouldn't contaminate all of the other gates. But now the gates are shut, and they can't haul their waste off. So when the Lord declared that they would die of famine or of sword, that's pretty self-explanatory. The Lord declares that they'll die of famine. Well, there's no food being brought in, and they're a city that's on top of a mountain. So they really can't grow anything. So we can see how famine would start to set in. Food supplies have dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. And then the Lord declared that they would die of pestilence. Oh, okay, well now we can start to see how pestilence would set in. Do y'all remember in Deuteronomy 28, the Lord warns that if they don't obey all the words of the law, in verse 60, that he will bring all of the plagues of Egypt upon them. Okay, so the flies and the gnats, all right, we can see that. There's waste everywhere, garbage everywhere. So the flies and the gnats come in, and the flies bite you, and it gets infected, and then it turns into a boil, and so now you got the boil. Okay, I can see all of that. But then in verse 61 in Deuteronomy 28, the Lord says, every sickness also, and every affliction that is not recorded in the book of this law, the Lord will bring upon you until you are destroyed. I'm thinking that has to do with the pestilence of just the waste that is accumulating inside the walls of Jerusalem. It must be horrendous. And you couldn't escape it. And we're just barely scratching the surface. Okay, we're talking about a year into the siege. There's still another year and a half to go. It gets a lot worse. And we're not even going to talk about that. We're just setting the context for here. Okay, Jeremiah is in prison in the court of the guard at the palace. Then verses 3 through 5 is just almost a little parenthetical thought that tells the quick version of why Jeremiah is in prison. We're going to read this passage again in chapter 34, almost verbatim to what's here. So we're going to pick it up when we get to chapter 34. It's not, that little parenthetical thought is not really important to what's going on here in this story. It's just kind of giving us the background of why Jeremiah was in prison. So the two big takeaways from these first two verses are Babylon is outside trying to break through the wall, and Jeremiah is in prison. All right, verse 6. Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came to me. Behold, Hanamel, the son of Shallum, your uncle, will come to you and say, buy my field that is at Anathoth, for the right of redemption is by purchase is yours. Then Hanamel, my cousin, came to me in the court of the guard, in accordance with the word of the Lord, and said to me, buy my field that is in Anathoth, in the land of Benjamin, for the right of possession and redemption is yours. Buy it for yourself. And then I knew that this was from the Lord. So I was fascinated that Jeremiah personally tells this story about himself. And we get some first person speaking from Jeremiah throughout the book, but it's not really stories. It's more about him delivering a prophetic message. And this is a prophetic message too, but this is a story. And I was just fascinated by that. This must have seemed like a really strange thing to hear from the Lord, since Babylon had almost assuredly already taken Anathoth. Anathoth was 3 miles north of Jerusalem. If you flip to the back of your folder, if you've got a map, in the back of your folder, you'll see Anathoth is just right above Jerusalem. Babylon would have had to come through Anathoth to get to the gates of Jerusalem. So Anathoth now is Babylon occupied territory. So Jeremiah, it seems, may have questioned if this word really was from the Lord. We don't know how he received this word. If it was a dream or a vision while he slept, like we saw back in chapter 31. Maybe he woke up and thought, I think that probably was just a plain old dream, because Babylon's about to knock these walls down. I don't think the Lord would tell me that. But then lo and behold, his cousin turns up out of the blue to visit him in prison and says, hey, Jeremiah, I got this nice piece of property in Anathoth. And I got to thinking, when Jeremiah gets himself out of the clink, he's going to need a place to live. Okay, so here's my 2 cents. I don't think this cousin is a good guy. I think he's about as smarmy as a person can be. And he waltzes in and he plays the kinsman redeemer card, and he thinks that he's come up with a really good plan. Most likely what's happened is that no other relative is interested in buying the land, and Jeremiah is a last resort. What he doesn't know is that he has literally just played right into the Lord's hands, because that's how Jeremiah knew, that really was from the Lord. So Jeremiah doesn't hesitate. And I am sure that this cousin thinks that he has just pulled off some kind of amazing Jedi mind trick. I have some land in Anathoth. You are the kinsman redeemer. Buy the land that is in Anathoth. Look, dude, you didn't pull anything off. It was the Lord. And verses 9 through 14 is the very detailed account of the transaction. Jeremiah doesn't leave anything out, even though Babylon is battering the walls from the outside and things are getting really rough on the inside. And Jeremiah knows that he's not ever going to get to set foot on this property. He goes through the entire legal process just as if the land were at peace. He doesn't want there to be any room for error or doubt. He signs the deed. He sealed it with a wax seal, got witnesses, weighed the money out. There were actually 2 copies of the deed, an open copy and a sealed copy, which is the norm for the day. He gave both copies to Baruch, that's his scribe, and he told them to put them in an earthenware vessel for safekeeping, which again was something that was pretty common for that day. If you had documents that you wanted to keep safe and wanted to be well preserved, you could put them in an earthenware vessel. This deed needed to last at least 70 years, Jeremiah knew. And the fascinating thing is that the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found back in the early part of the 20th century, it was probably, less than 100 years ago. A lot of those were found in these types of earthenware vessels. And the scroll of Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, were part of the documents that were found in these Dead Sea Scrolls. So I thought that was fascinating. Your first question for the reading was, why do you suppose Jeremiah goes to all the trouble to make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted? Well, because once the exile is over and people start coming back to the land, they're going to fully expect to go back to their family land, to their family plot. And deeds and titles would be paramount to rightfully claiming what was yours. I also found fascinating that in this passage, it talked about there were terms and conditions. And I thought, okay, it's 587 BC. What kind of terms and conditions could there possibly be? But then I got to thinking, this may have been part of the terms and conditions. Jeremiah didn't have any children. So someone who could prove that they were Jeremiah's next closest relative would be in line to cash in on this deed. So here's the faith of Jeremiah on display. When God says in verse 15 that houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land, Jeremiah literally puts his money where his mouth is. He practices what he preaches. He believes what he says. Then 16 through 25, we get this long prayer from Jeremiah. We just saw his faith in action, but then Jeremiah gets what we would call buyer's remorse nowadays. It's a beautiful prayer, actually. It starts with Jeremiah acknowledging to himself who God is and reminding himself of God's character. And he reminds himself because he doesn't need to remind God. God knows who God is. So he's reminding himself that in verse 17, nothing is too hard for God. Like, it wouldn't be too hard for God to call the Babylonians back at this point. In the Babylonian account of the siege, their historian recorded that Nebuchadnezzar sent Nebuzaradan with 300 mules loaded with iron axes that could cut iron. And as they were trying to destroy one of the gates of Jerusalem, all of the iron axes were destroyed except one. And they were on the brink of retreating and pulling back. But they gave it one last shot with this one last axe. And the way the story goes is that they finally broke through the gate with that last axe. Now, is that true? Was it embellished for Nebuchadnezzar's glory? I'm going to go with that one. But the point is, it wouldn't have been too hard for God. He could have called the Babylonians back. He made a donkey talk, for goodness sake. I mean, talk as plain as I'm talking to you right now. He's probably speaking Hebrew, but nothing is too hard for God. He could have called the Babylonians back, but he wasn't calling them back. Jeremiah says, they're here, and they're about to take this city. And you had me buy this piece of property. I just really don't understand. And God answers him and says, you know what, Jeremiah? You tell me, is there anything too hard for me? Now, it's a rhetorical question because Jeremiah has already answered it in his prayer. So God is inferring that, yeah, he could call the Babylonians back, like he called the Assyrians back from coming against Jerusalem when Hezekiah was king. But that's not the plan this time. The plan is Babylon is going to take this city and they're going to burn everything in it, including those houses on the rooftops where were used as shrines to the false gods. And those false gods are not going to do those houses any good. And if that wasn't bad enough, they set up idols in the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord. Calling on the name of the Lord while they're setting up idols in his house. So God says he's going to wipe this city clean. But because nothing is too hard for God, he's also going to restore it. And that's why he had Jeremiah by the field. It's a sign for hope. Okay, so let's pick it up in verse 37. I'm going to get a drink. All right, verse 37. Behold, I will gather them from all the countries to which I drove them in my anger and my wrath and in great indignation. I will bring them back to this place, and I will make them dwell in safety. And they shall be my people, and I will be their God. And I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever, for their own good and for the good of their children after them. I will make an everlasting covenant, that I will not turn away from doing good to them. And I will put the fear of me in their hearts, that they may not turn from me. I will rejoice in doing them good, and I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and all my soul. So here are these beautiful promises, again, repeated and repeated, so that the people would know they shall be my people and I will be their God. But who's doing all the work? In these verses, who's doing all the work? I will give them one heart and one way. I will make an everlasting covenant. I will put the fear of me in their hearts. I will plant them. The Lord is the active agent here. And he says he will do this with all his heart and all his soul. Is there any doubt that it's going to happen? This is what we call an anthropomorphism. It's attributing human characteristics to an other world and holy God so that our human minds can understand it. Excuse me. So to us, the depth and significance of all of God's heart and all of God's soul is very profound. But there again, that's just another word that we attach to it so we can understand it. Because what it is unfathomable. Fathomable. We can't begin to plumb the mysteries of it. And the land may be desolate now, but fields will be bought and deeds signed and sealed and witnessed in this land. Again, this is a promise that God makes to them. All right, chapter 33. Jeremiah is still in prison. So this is telling us that this is still relatively the same time period as the previous chapter. Maybe not, like the next day or something, but it's relatively in that same time frame. Let's open it in verse 3. Call to me and I will answer you and will tell you great and hidden things that you have not known. What a remarkable promise this is. This is a promise that's specific to Jeremiah. The you there is singular. Call to me and I will answer you. It's Jeremiah's personal pronoun. But this is an amazing promise. And the great and hidden things literally translates things that are beyond the reach of human knowledge. So it's things that I can't even stand here and speculate on because it's beyond anything that I can comprehend. But what's the caveat? Jeremiah has to ask the Lord. He has to call to the Lord and ask. Now, this particular promise isn't made to us, but we get a similar promise in the New Testament. Luke 11:9-10, Jesus says, "So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock, the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be open." So the question is, are we asking? Verse 4 is so sad to me. "For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the houses of this city and the houses of the kings of Judah that were torn down to make a defense against the siege mounds and against the sword." The houses were torn down to make a defense. Think about how hard they had to work to tear those houses down. Energy expended. Energy that they really couldn't afford to expend. They were fighting a losing battle. God had already told them to surrender and he would give them their lives. What were they making a defense against? That their defense wasn't a victory song. It was their death knell. That's so sad to me. When Babylon was finished with Jerusalem, it wasn't in disarray or decline. It wasn't deteriorating or damaged. It was utterly destroyed. It was a pile of ash and some rocks. That's one reason when Gedaliah was installed as governor, he didn't govern from Jerusalem. There was no Jerusalem. In verses 5-7, God says, take a look around this city that is completely ruined. As wrecked as this city is, completely destroyed, it's going to spring back with health and healing. And how's God going to do that? Verse 8, I will cleanse them from all the guilt of their sin against me, and I will forgive all the guilt of their sin and rebellion against me. It's all going to be new covenant based when there's forgiveness of sin. So this is future fulfillment. Yes, things are going to be different when they come back, when the exiles come back, and they will have learned some hard lessons. But they're still going to be under old covenant law. So they're not there yet. They're still in the time where God in his forbearance is passing over sin. So they don't get to experience the fullness of forgiveness. But this is a reminder that it's coming. And in God's economy, golly, y'all, this is so good. Okay, remember 2 weeks ago in chapter 30, verse 19, we read that God will make them honored. And I told you, excuse me, that this would be a complete reversal of fortune, because they were about as low as anyone could get, and people would hiss as they passed by them. Okay, well, here it is in verse 9. In God's economy, he could take a city that was once used as a warning for other nations. Like, this is how their God punishes them when they're disobedient. And God can turn it around as a demonstration of his goodness and power. Look at verse 9. And this city shall be to me a name of joy, a praise, and a glory before all the nations of the earth, who shall hear of all the good that I do for them. They shall fear and tremble because of all of the good and all the prosperity I provide for it. Okay, look, it's the nations of the earth looking and seeing and acknowledging the power and the goodness of the Lord. And if you're on the outside looking in, wouldn't you be curious to know more about this God of Israel? All right, verses 12 and 13, we get a big picture of reestablishing the economy and prosperity with livelihood and commerce coming back into the region in the form of raising sheep, which was a huge economic boost. It's how a lot of people made their living. But I love the smaller details that these verses provide for us. Verse 12, thus says the Lord of hosts, in this place that is waste, without man or beast, in all of its cities, there shall again be habitations of shepherds resting their flocks. In the cities of the hill country, in the cities of the Shephelah, in the cities of the Negeb, in the land of Benjamin, in the places about Jerusalem, and in the cities of Judah, the flocks shall again pass under the hand of the one who counts them, says the Lord. Habitations of shepherds resting their flocks. What does that sound like? Does that remind you of anything? Listen to Luke 2, verse 8. And in the same region, there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock at night. Such a small little detail in verse 12. But God reminds us in Luke 2 that he is at work even in those small details. And verse 13 was referenced as one of your questions, and it told you to go back and read 23:4. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm going to blow my nose. Hang on just a second. I'm so sorry. But that's much better. Okay. I told you to go back and read 23:4, which is where God promises to set up good shepherds over his people and that none would be missing. And the reason he knows that not one will be missing is because as those sheep come into the sheepfold, the shepherd is going to run his hand over each one and count them. And that's how he knows he only has 99 instead of 100. And each one of them is important to him. So he's going to go out and find that lost sheep. Then verses 14 through 26, we revisit the promise of the righteous branch of David. And this righteous branch, when he establishes his rule, he's going to set himself apart from other rulers because he will rule in justice and righteousness. And during his rule, Jerusalem will be so changed as a city that the city is going to be called by the same name as the branch. The Lord is our righteousness. Okay, so this is future fulfillment. But Jerusalem one day will finally bow down face first before her Messiah in full glorious submission to covenant faithfulness. The throne of David will be reestablished eternally, as well as the Levitical priesthood. And I confess, this about the Levitical priesthood was a little confusing to me, because while we speak of Christ as our eternal high priest, and I get that, I don't think I've ever heard it related to the Levitical priesthood in that particular way. The order of Melchizedek priesthood in the book of Hebrews, yes, but I wasn't familiar with the eternal Levitical priesthood. So I consulted several commentaries that they just didn't really talk a whole lot about it. And then I went to several of my study Bibles, and I think I finally kind of piecemealed it together in a way that was understandable for me. So the Levitical priesthood was a type of Christ, and I get that. So as Christ has fulfilled the Levitical priesthood as a type, there will be no disruption of the office of priesthood, because Christ is accomplishing his work even now of being our high priest. So that made sense to me when I kind of pieced it together from those several sources. And then God goes back to talk about the order of creation and says the only way that this covenant will be broken with his servant David and his ministers, the Levites, is if you can break his covenant that he made with day and night and make them divert from their courses that he set up for them. In other words, it's just not going to happen. Look at verse 22. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, and the sands of the sea cannot be measured, so I will multiply the offspring of David my servant, and the Levitical priests who minister to me. Now hold on just a minute. This is Abraham's promise. Yep. And this is how Abraham's promise will be fulfilled. This is how all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. Through the family of Christ, who are also a nation of priests. The Bible is telling one story. It's telling the story of a covenant that God made way back in the garden, and how God is working consciously and diligently and miraculously to fulfill that covenant. And that covenant leads to Jesus. And just as sure as the sun will rise tomorrow morning on God's command, his covenant is sure to be fulfilled at his appointed time. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and leave you all to discuss our two remaining questions. Probably got a good 10 or 12 minutes. So where did you see the character or nature of God this week? And did you see any gospel seeds in this week's reading? Okay, I love you guys. I can't wait to be with you again. You'll be taken care of next week, whether it's me doing this again, or it would be from a hotel room, or whether I can get in touch with somebody to step in and do the live class. But regardless, you're going to be taken care of for next week. I love you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.